today, Mike Muna. I'm the Director of Sales here over at LunchAssist. We also want to welcome a very special guest today, Abby Halpern. Abby is the Policy and Grants Manager for the Center for Eco-Literacy, and someone who has been a great partner of ours over the years. We also have our former Nutrition Director and LunchAssist founder, Jen McNeil, joining us as well. I want to give a special shout out to Catherine Carnitz on the Zoom controls, as well as the rest of the LunchAssist team that's joining us on the call today. And a special thank you to all of our customers for allowing us to continue to do things like this. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kick it off. Let's get started. Abby, I appreciate your time today. Would love to start by hearing just a little bit more about the Center for Eco-Literacy and what it's all about.
Thanks so much, Mike. The Center for Eco-Literacy, we are a nonprofit and we advance change in TK through 12 education and school food systems to support students and the people who nourish them. The Center for Eco-Literacy's California Food for California Kids initiative, which some of you on the call are part of, supports school districts to provide students with freshly prepared, locally sourced school meals and experiences connecting the classroom, cafeteria, and garden. Our initiative provides programs, resources, and inspiration for school nutrition professionals, educators, and school communities. And one of the very best parts of my job is working with school nutrition directors all over the state who are part of the California Food for California Kids initiative to inform and shape our policy work. So the Center for Eco-Literacy is proud to be one of the leaders of the School Meals for All Coalition, and these are the over 150 organizations that have signed on to support School Meals for All in the 2024 legislative process. This includes dozens of school districts. If you squint, maybe you can see your logo. Some of you are on the call today. Thank you for joining us in this advocacy work. The Center for Eco-Literacy's involvement in this advocacy has been driven from the very beginning from inputs from brilliant school nutrition professionals like you. We could not do this advocacy work without you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Abby. Well, I know we appreciate all the work that you do in the space, especially on the advocacy side, right? And along those lines, you always have your ear to the ground on the budget process, and the California governor just released the May Revise. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the California budget process, we start in January with an initial budget. And then in May, the governor updates that budget with information from our April tax returns. It's important to remember that the May Revise is not a final budget. There's still a lot that can happen between now and the end of June when the legislature and the governor negotiate a final budget. And I see from the chat, some of you are already on tenterhooks wondering about universal meals. And we do have some good news today to share on school nutrition issues. The state is overall facing a pretty grim budget situation. The estimated budget deficit is $45 billion. And so that means the state has to make some really hard decisions about cuts to important programs.
Wow. Did you just say billion with a B? That's crazy. Yeah. That sounds like a serious deficit there. But what is encouraging to hear is that there is some good news for schools. Can you tell us a bit more about what's included in the May Revise, specifically what our directors need to know, right?
And I would say there's good news for school nutrition, not necessarily good news for schools writ large, because it is such a tough budget year for schools, and there's some of that larger schools budget is still up for discussion and debate. But there is good news for school nutrition, and that's really thanks to the advocacy from all of you and your peers. So for instance, we had over 35 organizations provide public comment in March in support of School Meals for All, including school nutrition directors, kitchen managers, even students and other advocates showed up to support. And the best news is that the governor continues to champion School Meals for All as an essential tool to addressing childhood hunger. He's proposed preserving full funding for School Meals for All in the May Revise so we can breathe a little sigh of relief while we wait to hear about the final budget details. And thanks to this policy and your hard work, more students than ever before in California are eating school meals, are nourished and ready to learn. So the state is now projecting that 885 million school meals will be served next school year, and the governor's May revise not only protects the funding that was there for this program last year, but adds an additional $179 million to account for the increased participation compared to last year's levels. Now, on the school nutrition reimbursement, we're expecting about a 1 cent increase. That's pretty modest, and that's tied to the 1% cost of living adjustment that's seen across the school budget. So that's standard. Note that this is just the state piece of it, but we expect a separate federal meal reimbursement increase as well. And then there's also, thankfully, 54 million to cover the shortfall that we're seeing in this current year's budget, because we've seen increased participation not only looking to next year, but in the current year. So this 54 million backfills our current budget to make sure that your reimbursements for the claims at the end of this year are going to be fully covered. So that's terrific to see the governor's continued support for universal school meals.
Wow, that's quite a few updates there. Definitely grateful, for the universal meals funding that it has been preserved and even increased, it sounds like. That's so great. Remember, by the way, if anybody has any questions for Abby, just feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll try and answer them as we go through the live in a few minutes. So Abby, I have another question. Given the overall state budget shortfall, is there anything nutrition directors can do to help?
Yes, absolutely. One of the best things you can do to help is to ensure that you're maximizing federal reimbursements in your meal program. Let me just take a second and explain this delightful little graph. I'm a bit of a data nerd, so excuse me for the graph, but here you'll see the federal funding for school meals is in green for the 3 different meal categories, and the state funding in yellow is the state's universal school meals reimbursement. So the state is making up the difference for anything that we don't get from the feds. And then with the orange on top, that's the state meal reimbursement, the 96 or 97 cents the state provides for every meal. And any way that you can draw down more federal funding is going to reduce the state's cost, whether that's making sure that you have all your directly certified students identified or what provision you choose to use. So the state's continually working to optimize federal funding for school meals for all while maintaining that local flexibility. Last year, for reference, the USDA contributed about 2.8 billion to our school meals program and those federal meal reimbursements, and the state around 1.6 billion. So the feds are still paying for the majority of the program, which is great. And especially in these tough budget years, doing all that you can to draw down as much federal funding as possible is particularly important. It's worth noting that the state's fiscal experts are currently projecting that the next few years are likely going to be pretty tough ones for the state. So as I mentioned, the provision you choose, whether that's community eligibility provision, commonly known as CEP, or provision 2, commonly known as P2, can have a big impact on the federal funding your district receives and how much the state needs to contribute to make up that difference, so that every meal is fully funded at the federal free rate. Whether CEP or Provision 2 draws down more federal funding is a bit complicated, and it depends a lot on the demographics of your district, not only what that identified student percentage or ISP is, but also what the percentage of students who qualify for free or reduced meals is and the balance between those two numbers. So if you can, try running numbers on both and remember that you can group schools to optimize the federal funding under CEP. So what does this have to do with the May revise? Well, the proposed language change in the May revise responds to the USDA's new expansion of CEP down to that 25% ISP. And the May revise would keep the state's requirement to opt into a provision at 40% ISP. So it's raising it back up from the newly lowered 25. But remember that requirement, for those of you who it applies to, is to opt into a federal provision, but that provision can be either CEP or P2. So you still have the option to look at what the costs and benefits are of each and what makes most sense for your district. This still is going to allow schools with 25% ISP and higher to participate in CEP. And as always, any district can participate in P2.
This is super helpful, and it's so good to know more details about how this all works and what we can do to help. But before we do, I want to check in with Jen on a few more funding questions. Abby, it's been great hearing from you on the May Revise, but I want to go over to Jen real quick. So Jen, what else can you tell us about the current funding climate and specifically all the extra funding streams folks are managing? We've got KIT funds, we've got supply chain, and a few others. So starting with KIT funds, what's the latest, and what do folks need to know?
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Abby. It's been so great hearing from you on all this. And like we said and put in the chat, definitely put your questions. I see some questions about the CEP, so we'll dig into more about what that means in the Q&A section. So with KIT funding, there is another piece that was updated in the May Revise. So kind of tagging on to what Abby was just sharing, one last piece that relates to the May Revise is that the reporting deadline for the 2021 KIT funds, which is supposed to be coming up next month. Actually, many of you have already filled out the reports. You've been filling those out with clients who've already spent their 2021 KIT funds. But if you haven't expended fully all of your 2021 KIT funds, they have proposed that we would have until June 30th of 2025 to report and spend on all of the 2021 KIT funds. And that's just kind of in response to a lot of the delays in getting equipment with like supply chain and everything. So I'm actually going to throw a copy of the May Revise, like the summary that I was looking at and that Abby and I looked through a little bit, that she walked me through very nicely so that I understood it. I just put that in the chat, so it has my highlights, if, for whatever that's worth. If you want to kind of see what I've highlighted that's sticking out to me. And this is highlighted in there so you can see more details about how it's written. And then just like a quick reminder, so basically it takes us from, we've got this timeline of KIT funding, and it just sort of like scratching out the 2024 deadline. And essentially, if this goes through, the May Revise would be saying that like essentially 2021 and 22 KIT funds would be spent by June 30th of 2025. So yeah, good to have in mind, especially if you have some last minute things you're trying to purchase. Yeah. And then we do have a tracking tool that I'll throw in the chat box right now. If you're trying to sort out like, have I spent everything? We just sort of developed this actually back in 2021 or 2022, just to kind of keep things straight. And we've been updating it with clients so that you can make sure you have spent everything and you're in the right buckets too, because 2021, remember, had the 2 buckets of funding. 22, everything is sort of the same allowable costs no matter what, but just to keep track and make sure you don't leave any money on the table.
Oh, that's so good to hear about the proposed extension on reporting and spending. I know in my job, I speak with a lot of folks who have KIT funds to spend, and it's great to hear that people will have more time to consider purchases and make solid investments in their program. Now, Jen, what else can you tell us about another California-specific funding stream called School Food Best Practices?
Yes. So school food best practices, not everyone got this, but if you did, you would have opted in and you would have gotten at least $50,000 and then additional money based on your participation. So this one is still a deadline to spend of June 30th of 2025. So definitely still have time to spend. And I just wanted to do a quick reminder on this. And again, it doesn't relate to everyone. Not everyone opted into it. But if you did, just a quick reminder on the allowable expenses. So I think the big thing with this one is that, KIT funds, it was like for training and equipment, infrastructure. You can use it for like consulting, all that kind of stuff. But you can't use KIT funding for food. School food best practices is really great because it kind of taps into being able to use some of this money for actual food purchases of California grown food, whole or minimally processed foods, you know, plant-based options, all these kinds of things. You can still also use it on staffing of your own, you know, your own staff and some equipment as well. So just be cautious too. One of the things, and someone had to point this out to me, I didn't know it from the beginning, but the unallowable expenses on school food best practices, just make sure you're not trying to use this money on milk. Milk is an unallowable cost just because there's other funding streams for that. So that's one that, yeah, like I said, I needed someone to tell me. So I wanted to flag that if you're trying to manage like how you're spending this one and make sure you're drawing down those funds appropriately.
This is great information. So good to know. So with kit funds, you know, there are a lot of folks that are scratch cooking. So it sounds like school food best practices is a great stream to help purchase all that healthy food y'all are preparing. Now, here's another one that can be used towards food purchases, supply chain assistance funds. So what can you tell us about this funding stream?
Yeah, so I wanted to point out supply chain assistance funds as well, because a lot of people got these, and this is a federal funding stream. There's been 4 rounds. There was just a 4th round. Most folks, I think, are getting their checks in the mail, or you just got it on that 4th round of supply chain assistance funds. This one is a bit, in some ways it's like a bit easier because there's not as much reporting on it and there's no expenditure deadline, but you just want to make sure you're still accounting for it and spending it down appropriately, right? So you just want to make sure that you're only spending it for current and future expenses. So if you just got the 4th round, you're using it from like the day you get your check forward, basically. It's not for past purchases. And then it's only for domestic foods. So you have to be really careful, like domestic, minimally processed foods. So if you want to use your supply chain assistance funds on produce, using them for a local farmer that you're purchasing from, that'll be really easy because you know all their food is grown domestically. But if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to pay my produce vendor with this money, be careful, because if you order bananas, those are non-domestic, you'd have to bring out the cost of the bananas before you allocate the cost of that invoice to this funding stream. So you just want to be, you know, that's a balancing act in like how you account for it, because it is a lot of money that some districts got. You know, it's a lot of people have gotten several hundreds of thousands of dollars and more over the course of the 4 allocations of supply chain assistance funds. And then again, making sure you know the unallowable costs, which are really related to foods that are not minimally processed, and being sure you're familiar with the exact definitions of minimally processed for this funding stream, which actually differs from what's on KIT as well. So we have a tool that we'll share at the end that lists out all the definitions for you as well that you can kind of reference.
Okay, that's great. And I think it sounds like the really key information here is that the supply chain assistance funds don't have a spending deadline. So that's really nice to know. Okay, we've got one more, local foods for schools. What you got for us on local foods for schools, Jen?
So local foods for schools is another federal funding stream, and this one is a little bit cumbersome, I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of reporting with this one, so and it's a lot shorter deadline. So again, this one may not apply to you because not everyone opted into local foods for schools. It does have an extension on the spending deadline, so they've extended it now to November 29th, 2024. I think people have just recently gotten their checks to spend on this one, so that gives you a few months to spend if you did opt into local foods for schools. This one also, there's a lot of documentation that you have to send to CDE for every single vendor that you're purchasing from. So that's one of the reasons that a lot of people didn't opt in, because they're like, I can't be bothered with that. But it is a decent chunk of change if you got it, and you just have to do the reporting, work with the LFS grant team at CDE so you can send that information in. There was just a report due on May 14th, so hopefully you met that deadline. If not, go ahead and email them. And then I think the one thing that I wanted to point out on this one is, oh, Jamie said she got her check yesterday. Okay, cool. So yeah, checks are in the mail or in your account, hopefully. So you can start spending. And I wanted to mention this again, something that I learned so much from our clients. Like everyone, points different things out, and I just wanted to point something out that I needed to be reminded about when this first came out, and I didn't realize. So anyway, cannot be used for food that the district was already purchasing. So it's for new purchases, right? So local foods for schools specifically, you can't duplicate existing food procurement. It has to be for new purchases. So an example we have here for you is like if you already purchase organic, locally grown lettuce for your daily elementary school salad bars, you can't put the local foods for schools funding towards that because you've already been purchasing that. But if you then expand your salad bars and you say, I'm going to purchase organic, locally grown lettuce, but now I'm going to serve it at the high schools because the high schools didn't have it before, and we're starting salad bars there because of local foods for schools, then that would be an allowable cost. So that's a little tricky, and that's different than some of the other funding streams. So just kind of keep that in mind if it's like new purchases or expanded purchases, or maybe you did organic local lettuce 1 day a week and now you're going to do it 5 days a week, that would be an expanded purchase, but it can't just kind of go towards something that you were already buying. And then similar to the other funding streams, it's for new or expanded purchases of these minimally processed foods. And then unallowable costs are some of the more like processed foods. And yeah, that's local foods for schools.
That's awesome. That sounds like there's a lot of different funding streams, and I think you did a really good job of like differentiating them, but I still feel like they all sound like super similar. How are directors supposed to keep this straight? Are there any resources to assist? Wink, wink.
Why, yes. Funny you should ask. We do have this handy dandy supplemental funding tracker. We've shared it out before, so some people might already have it. I know we keep track of this for all of our clients. Every one of our clients has one of these going. Really just like, did we get this? Did we opt into it? What was it for? What did we spend it on? Kind of just like checking off to make sure that everything's been spent. And then if you keep scrolling on the spreadsheet, it has a link to all the like CBD web pages and the allowable costs. So it's like kind of like a good spreadsheet just to kind of keep straight what are all of these for and what's the allowable uses and whatnot. So yeah, I just put the link to that in the chat. You're welcome to use that if you don't already have it. And yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And I think the biggest message here is just really making sure you optimize all of this funding. The state doesn't want to be taking back money on any of these. And the more that we utilize this, the more offsets the costs of other things that we're paying for and with other funding streams. So yeah, it's really sometimes they say this stuff like, oh man, you have to do all this reporting, but it's really, really lucky to have all these, funding streams and to be able to use towards healthy local foods and scratch cooking and training and all of that kind of stuff. So I think just making sure that we draw down on it and we use it appropriately so there's never a question later of what it went towards.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, so that kind of concludes the main portion here. So a couple other things just to wrap up. So we're going to send a follow-up email tomorrow with links to the recordings and resources. For anybody that's a pro member, all of the webinars should now be available within LunchAssist Pro in the training library, so you can access them there. And then I want to talk about our next chat. So next chat's kind of a little bit of bittersweet here. Is going to be the last of this series. So Thursday, May 30th at 2 p.m. Please, if you can join us, we'd love to have you there. Emma will be back to host. And then we've got our special guest, Allie, one of our consultants. So she'll be talking about farm to school next week. So lots of good information to come. And then I also want to mention for anybody, we are taking on new clients. So we do offer, one-on-one consulting. We have spots that are open. If you're interested, please, reach out to me at mike@lunchassist.org. Happy to give you more information on our consulting packages. So we would love to work with you. And then also, our LunchAssist Pro website, with our training, tracking tools, templates, and resources. You've got some of those good examples here. Now, before we go into our Q&A, I do want to turn it back over to Abby to talk a little bit more about the Center of Eco-Literacy. So Abby, I know there was one other thing you wanted to mention here.
Thanks so much, Mike. I just wanted to see if anyone who is a California school nutrition professional would like to join us in our California Food for California Kids network. I see some folks from the network on the call today, so they can tell you how fun it is to be part of this free network. We are proud to say this now includes over 120 public school districts across the state and 36 counties, and we would love to have you join us for some more free resources, support, and to get involved in advocacy work. So I think that leads us right back into our Q&A. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I have to chime in for a second because I was well, I don't know if it was even called California Food for California Kids back when I was part of this, but I really got my start in school nutrition growing up with being part of the Center for Eco-Literacy, and helped me learn so much about school nutrition from the time I think I started in the industry at 22 years old. So yeah, just really great. Anyone who's like a new director as well, it's such a great way to meet other people, and or if you just want to meet like like-minded folks or just kind of be part of something else. Really values aligned with what we do at LunchAssist, and you guys have been such a great partner and such a great supporter of me individually as a professional and of our company LunchAssist. And yeah, I just can't speak highly enough.
Oh, Jen, thank you. That is such a beautiful testimony, and we really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we're ready to hop into our Q&A. Looks like our first question comes from Melissa Herrera. Melissa says, hearing the universal meals in California may be cut for the upcoming school year from upper admin, this would change whether sites did provision 2 versus CEP. Have you heard any updates?
I think Melissa posted this before we got into our updates, so hopefully our updates covered this, and that we are not currently hearing that universal meals will be cut. So really grateful to that, and we'll keep you all posted if we hear any changes.
Awesome. And it looks like you put some answers in the chat, but I'm going to read them so everybody else can hear here. So Lucy Hicks asks, where are you getting your participation data on universal meals?
Also a great question. So this was included in that fiscal note around the May revise that Jen put in the chat, that 885 million. And these are always estimates that are continually evolving, but the state actually has a new process where CDE provides them like a mid-year update so they can adjust the numbers. And we're just trying to figure out ways to avoid, for those of you who have been directors for a long time, remember that you used to get prorated reimbursements at the end of the year when the estimates were off. So they've put in new processes to try to make sure that that does not happen to you.
Awesome. So next we've got Emily Sina. If the final budget does increase the mandatory provision threshold to 40%, can we rescind CEP applications that have been approved?
So the deadlines on this are really tricky, right? Because the CEP deadline is June 30th and the final budget deadline is June 30th. And so I think a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't give us any time to take this into account. I don't know what to advise on this. I would say ask CDE maybe on the town hall next week to see if they have thoughts about the timing of the final budget and the timing of your decision whether to do CEP or P2.
Yeah, I think that's right. Abby and I were sort of mind melding about this yesterday or the day before, whenever we were connecting. And I was like, I just don't know exactly what to do with our clients and how we're advising on this as well. I think waiting to Tuesday and putting that question in the chat, and seeing, what the guidance is from Kim and her team on like what they want folks to do, right? Because currently, if you are at 25% ISP, you're supposed to opt in to CEP or provision 2. But if this May revise gets approved, which I seems highly likely that piece of it would, then you would only be mandated to opt into CEP or provision 2 at a 40% ISP, just like this past year, right? You could still opt in to CEP at a 25% ISP if you want. It's not precluding that. It's not saying that's not allowed. It's just saying it's like between the 25 and the 40, it's not mandatory for the May revise, which is not approved. So, and then you have to turn in your paperwork on CEP or provision 2 by June 30th. So, I mean, Emily, I think the one good thing is like you could, let's say you didn't, like you no longer wanted to do CEP, I'm sure you could rescind your application for CEP on June 30th, right? Because hopefully the budget is approved by like the 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, something like that. The other thing is, yeah, maybe asking CDE that at the time of approval. Like, I only want to do this if it's mandatory. So, and then the other thing we were saying is like P2, like you could always like opt into P2. I know P2 you can always like opt back out of easily. I just don't know about CEP, but I would think that if you emailed them, they would like, you know, it's just you can't opt in after June 30th. I think that's the biggest thing. Like either program, if you're trying to debate between CEP and P2, you can't opt in after June 30th. You have to opt into one of them before. So that's tricky. So yeah, dilemmas in school nutrition. There's always something, isn't there?
Well, that kind of leads into our next question. Lori Keefe, why did they change back to 40% ISP?
Oh, I'm sorry, Larry. I misunderstood your question in my response. I thought you said when. They just did it and they revised, but why? You know, I think there's some just general confusion both in the legislature and among school nutrition directors about whether that requirement was to opt into CEP or whether it's to opt into a provision. And so I think because of that confusion, when you're looking at CEP versus provision 2 and maximizing this federal reimbursement, it's very clear that at the higher ISPs, CEP is the way to go in terms of drawing down more federal funding. But especially between that 25% and 40% ISP, it's really a dice roll, depending on your district's demographics, about whether CEP maximizes federal funding. So I think moving that threshold back up is sort of a recognition that between those two ISPs, the 25% and the 40%, you might not necessarily be maximizing federal funding by using CEP, but there might be a lot of good reasons that your district would choose to do CEP anyways. And so, you know, I think it's that balance between providing local flexibility and trying to maximize the federal reimbursement for the school meal programs during a tough budget year.
Yeah, and Emily just put that in the chat. So based on Emily's preliminary calculations, an ISP of 25% with the loss of free and reduced meal applications may not actually increase federal portion of reimbursement. So that's exactly right. Like if you go from meal applications to CEP at 25%, a lot of districts are going to actually have less federal reimbursement in that scenario. So that's exactly why this is being lifted. Now, like Abby was saying, it's CEP or P2. So you could do P2, and anyone could do P2. A lot of our clients who are like 10, 12% free and reduced are actually doing P2 because it just locks you into a percentage. It doesn't like change your meal application percentage, right? It's an option for anyone. But yeah, a lot of times meal applications, whether that's meal applications through P2 or meal applications through standard meal counting and claiming, is going to result in more federal funding coming into your district at those lower ISPs.
And it really just to go back to the point, it really depends on the demographics of your district. If you have an ISP of 25% and 30% of your students qualify for free or reduced price meals, it's going to make way more sense to do CEP. But if you have an ISP, same ISP, 25%, but 60% of your students qualify for meal apps through the meal apps, then it's going to make way more sense for federal funding to do provision 2 or standard counting and claiming. So it really just depends
so true. Yeah.
on your district specific demographics and the balance between your ISP and your free reduced percentage.
So is there a tool that does that specific calculation? Like I know there's like a few different tools. Like we have our No Kid Hungry tool that's for that we helped develop that does like data management and then helps optimize your extended eligibility. And then there's the meals count tool that helps with grouping. Is there something that helps you differentiate between what we're talking about for California specifically, like federal, how much Give me all the federal funds. Calculate it for me.
I think we're dreaming it up right now, Jen. We should create one
Okay.
together. But like, I think the reason it's so tricky is because of grouping. Like, we don't know what you can achieve with the grouping in terms of in CEP to maximize that federal drawdown. But like at a district level, if you're only looking at a district level, an easy rule of thumb is if you take your free and reduced percentage and you divide it by 1.6, if that is bigger than the ISP, right, then you'll draw down more if you use standard counting and claiming or P2. And if that's less than the ISP, then you'll draw down more using CEP. So that 1.6, right, that's the CEP multiplier. So just think about that as the difference between your ISP and your free and reduced percentage. And depending on where you fall on that threshold, that'll tell you whether you'll get more federal funding at a district level.
Wait. Okay, I don't know if anyone else is really keen on this.
I know. We'll
but
send.
Can you guys?
Well,
Well,
Jen,
no. Can you? Yes.
This is Brian Chirito. I think the easiest way, right? There used to be that, spreadsheet out there that I think when CEP was relatively new, but I never really felt that it was, I could trust it. So basically I just took our numbers, real data from the prior year, and just played with the percentages on a spreadsheet. So at least I felt comfortable that I was using my data with what the reimbursement would be based off of, per 100 kids, you're going to get 90% of them at the, the free rate compared to the pay rate, and just try to run numbers like that in real time, like you were doing a claim almost, just to try to do a side-by-side number comparison.
Yeah.
Because it can get tricky, right? I mean, obviously we have to use the 1.6 and things like that, but sometimes those definitions and verbiage gets confusing, and that's where people can get mixed up with whether it's a provision 2 or whether it's your ISP compared to your free and reduced. So the communication could get jumbled in there if it's not clear. So if you have your your CEP percentage and you can finalize that after you multiply it by 1.6, that gives you your claiming percentages, and that's where it gets crazy. But the end result is you got to get to your claiming percentages, and then once you do that, then you can run the numbers based off of what you served prior year to see if you would make more money or if it would be equal to pay your bills and not have to dip into a non-federal source per se.
exactly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, or did that make no sense?
No, it makes total sense. Yeah. I think go ahead, Abby.
It makes total sense. I mean, I think that's the best thing to do, right? Is to run your numbers for both and see how it stacks up. I think that's great advice. The rule of thumb, I'm trying to say, maybe it's easier if you just multiply your ISP by 1.6, right? Just like as whatever that is.
But Abby, that, like, you are correct there, but that just gives you your funding formula, right? That's where it can get confusing for some if they don't follow it all the way through, right? You have your free and reduced percentages, or based off CEP, you have your student population that is directly certified. Then you multiply that by 1.6 to get to your funding formula. So
exactly,
there's a lot of confusion that could be in there to get to those percentages for your funding formula.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
That's
the problem.
There.
The back of the envelope can be off by like 10%. Like
correct.
Once you go, yeah,
100%. But if you're confident that you got to your funding formula, then you can go run the numbers based off of meals, based off of the claiming rate to then see what kind of revenue you're going to have.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, well, I'm seeing a great comment here. Maybe I shouldn't skip to it, but the issue is that parents aren't filling out the application since the kids are eating for free. What a common problem. Some solutions that we've heard from some of the directors we work with, a lot of folks are promoting summer EBT. That's $120 for kids over the summer if they qualified. for a program. So that could be a good communication tool for meal apps. Another one is the after school programs, which are income based now. I mean, I know everyone has also seen LAUSD's More Than a Meal campaign and, you know, the internet testing fees, et cetera. We talked to folks out of Palm Springs who say they make it about funding for their child's classroom, like just like really try to personalize it. But I think there's a lot to be done on communicating the meal apps, not just in the nutrition services department, but at the whole district around supporting those and getting those in, because it really drives the funding for the whole school.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead,
Can I make a
Rebecca.
comment on that?
Mhm.
Something that I'm did was to work with the counseling teams at each school.
Mm.
And I made up a little reasons why to sign up. I was, riffing off a document that LunchAssist prepared some time ago, using that as a template. But just to encourage them that, it's not, yes, the kids are eating for free, but that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply for the free and reduced, because there's other perks that you get, if you have that, what we call it in the district, the golden ticket, to get these other, like reduced cable prices, or, reduced SAP, fees or whatever. So we're partnering with the counseling teams to kind of push that out as well.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's move on to Hannah Carroll's question. When does the final budget come out? I'm wondering when the final decision will be made on the 25% participation requirement.
So final budget will be passed by the end of June. And I think we've talked about how that's a tricky deadline, and our suggestion to follow up and see if CDE has some more guidance for us on how to navigate that during next week's town hall with them.
Rebecca, going back to you, will this series continue next year? Yes, we are going to pick it back up in the fall. So yeah, we'll be definitely be doing some additional videos or Zoom calls like this, I should say.
Yeah, and if you guys have any suggestions on what you might like to hear about, or how you might like it to be formatted, or just any and all suggestions, we're here for it. So this season, this like 13 weeks, we tried to keep it close to like 30 minutes of content. So if people just wanted to come for the content and hop off, but then we wanted to have like a bit of a community feel with the Q&A and invite people to come off mute and everything like that. So yeah, definitely open to ideas on what you might want to see. And if it should, we liked kind of doing weekly, because even if you miss it, you can listen to it. You can even listen to it in the car. We have the episodes on YouTube, and they kind of sound a little bit like podcasty. So I've listened to them on my headphones when I'm trying to hear how we did, and I don't think you miss too much, other than Catherine's amazing graphics that she puts together, which actually make it all look and feel so nice and polished. But you can still just have a listen as well.
All right, Kim Anderson asks, isn't in the best interest of the state to have us go at 25%, since the feds would pay more and that would help the state budget? Help me understand.
I think that's that like nuance that we're seeing. It's like, it's kind of tough. It depends on your district, right? Like, I feel like a lot of people at 25%, they would have gotten more applications, but it just depends. It's like, it so varies by district on what, if you're, because you multiply your directs with, if you multiply your direct cert free, and like all of your homeless, migrant, foster, all that, you multiply by 1.6. So then if that DC times 1.6 is like comparable to what your current free and reduced is, like, or if it's higher or lower, that's gonna kind of make a big difference. Because also we're not getting to include like DC reduced. What if you have a ton of DC reduced, and then you get a lot of meal applications, then that's gonna swing it towards meal applications being the better source of federal funding. And then it becomes more of a wash when you get upwards of like 50 to 60% CEP or direct cert ISP, because then that gets multiplied by 1.6 and you're almost 100% free no matter which way you go. So it doesn't really, it's kind of a wash when we get upwards of that. But yeah, I think Kim, you might have put that in before we had that like debrief a few minutes ago anyway.
All right, so next, Diane Eckstein. Hey, Diane. What are the major differences between CEP and Provision 2?
Oh, this is such a good question. So CEP is based on your directly certified students, directly certified at the free rate only. So that's your students who are participating in other public benefit programs like CalFresh or Medi-Cal, or they're homeless, they're migrant, runaway, etc. Like those are your directly certified students. And the great thing about CEP is that for the meal program, there are not any meal applications. So you're just taking those directly certified students, you're doing your household matching, and there's a federal funding formula for what you draw down. For Provision 2, it's just like standard counting and claiming for an entire year. You are counting how many students who qualify for free meals are getting those free meals. Now, no one's paying for the meals because we have school meals for all, but you're still getting your student IDs. You're counting up the number of free meals served, the number of reduced price meals served, the number of paid meals served. State's making up the difference, but then you get a percentage breakdown. And then in the subsequent 3 years for Provision 2, you're taking those percentages of students who qualified for free meals, who qualified for reduced price meals, who qualified for paid meals, and you're just applying that to your total meal count. So in the subsequent 3 years for Provision 2, you can use a sticker counter if you want to. If you want to scan your students for allergies, you can still keep scanning them. But Provision 2 provides that administrative flexibility in the 3 years after the base year to not collect meal applications except for your newly enrolled students, to make your lunch lines go faster, etc. Same as you can do with CEP, but sort of that federal drawdown piece, because of how these formulas are calculated, are very different. And of course, your administrative burden for the first year of Provision 2 is going to be much higher than CEP, although the application is easier.
All
Great
right.
summary, Abby. Couldn't have said it better myself.
I learned it all from you, Jen.
So we'll go back to Kim again. So what is the advantage for me with a 12% free and reduced to go to Provision 2?
I think that's basically what I said is the first year it's going to feel exactly the same as your standard counting and claiming. But those 3 years after, like, you don't have to worry about meal applications. Isn't that great? Like, think about how much time your staff could spend on menu planning or something else if they weren't doing meal applications for 3 years. So that's the real advantage of P2. And if you find out that your student demographics drastically change in those 3 years, you can always do another base year. Like, you're not locked in. You just have the option to not worry about it for 3 years. And you can even re-up it, right, Jen?
Yeah, you can re-up it. I think, Kim, it would definitely be something for you to consider because you have the 2 districts that you manage as well. So you're doing like double work in a lot of ways, right? Having to collect from both districts. And then on the district side, and we got into this more on a previous call. If anyone missed it, it's on YouTube and in your pro accounts about like CEP and Provision 2 and like the differences. And basically, I think one of the interesting things is like it could help the district as well with LCFF, because if they do Provision 2, they don't necessarily have to do alternative income forms or you don't do applications every year, but even on the alternative income form side, they can establish an LCFF base year. So all that paperwork on alternative income forms and or meal applications goes down quite significantly for at least 3 years while you ride out the base year. But if the district's like, oh no, like there's a whole bunch of changes, we want to lock it in, then, or we want to re-up it, like increasing poverty. Although, Kim, I don't think there's no, your area is just getting more affluent. So it might be good to lock it in where you're at, because I don't think home prices in that area are going down. So, yeah, it's interesting. It would be good to talk through with your higher ups too, to be like, okay, Because at that point, I feel like a lot of it also comes down to what the district wants to do for LCFF purposes. It's like everything is so intertwined when you talk about meal applications and alternative income forms.
And it looks like she asked a follow-up to that, but Jackie already answered it in the chat, so we'll skip over that. So lastly, we'll move over to Emily Sina again. Is there any current advocacy work to encourage state legislatures to separate LCFF criteria from the meal applications altogether, as in require districts to use a different process for identifying unduplicated pupils?
This is such a great question. You know, other states have done some similar things where they've started to decouple from meal applications. What's really interesting to me is that we now have 60% of our districts using CEP. That's twice as much as it was 5 years ago. And so as more and more districts are moving to CEP, fewer and fewer are collecting those meal applications. I'm not aware of advocacy in California around decoupling the LCFF. I think it gets really complicated really quickly because there are going to be a lot of winners and losers in sort of how those new formulas are constructed. And so it's a thorny issue for sure. But you know, I have a fantasy one day of statewide CEP, right? Where you know, our direct certification numbers would be high enough that we could sort of operate this universal meals program on a way that sort of makes more sense on a state level. But I think we'd need to see slightly higher direct certification numbers first.
And there is work behind the scenes, at least discussions about how to optimize direct cert in our state, because that's not optimized compared to other states, right?
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting. The Department of Ed is going to roll out something called fuzzy or probabilistic matching in CalPads next year. So all the matching in CalPads had to be an exact name. So your name had to be spelled, student's name had to be spelled exactly correctly and entered into all the same fields for it to match. And I know so many directors were like looking at it by hand going, well, that's the same student. They live at the same address and they have the same birthday. And, you know, I know who that is. Their name was just a little typo, right? And so they're going to implement this advanced software called probabilistic or fuzzy matching, which will get those near matches that have the same address or the same birthday in CalPad, and hopefully make it easier for all of you to identify those directly certified students. So that's supposed to be in place for next school year, which I hope is going to be really great in terms of getting our direct cert numbers up. And there are some other solutions we've been working with CDE on to continue to improve the state's direct certification system so that we can continue to draw down more federal funding, which is the name of the game this year.
Exactly. Is there anything like that's being looked at for extended eligibility? I know that's a really difficult one that we see a lot of issues with when we try to do direct certs and or when we try to do CEP applications. That No Kid Hungry tool that we worked on has a nice tool to match people up, and certain POS companies also have a better system than others on matching siblings. But a lot of folks are left with all these kids that are the sibling in the same household, but are not getting captured on their, day-to-day meal counts, and then eventually even sometimes getting left off of CEP.
That's a great question, Jen. In my conversations with CDE around extending those household matches, they said they didn't currently have a field for sibling in their data system. So it's something that would take a few more years for them to roll out, but they are hoping to provide more technical assistance in the coming year on those household matches as they sort of work to improve their data systems.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there are some cool nutrition software companies out, like my family's former company, the Free and Reduced system, and that has a really, really nice utility where you can utilize different matching points, such as, addresses that are similar, parent first and last name that are similar, different ways to find those students that might potentially be in the same household, and utilize that tool, and then the tool can then automatically match those and extend the benefits based off of that matching criteria that you've created there. So yeah, I would definitely talk to your whoever your provider is for your school nutrition software and their free and reduced systems, and ask them what type of utilities that they have to extend those benefits. Some just have reports, which are, you know, whatever. You still have to go through it manually, but some do have nice utilities that you can utilize to do that matching process for you too.
I'm just putting the link into that tool that we use or that we developed. It's literally just a spreadsheet. It's nothing fancy, but it does help with your CEP application. And then it does basically, Brendan, what you were talking about, where you put your enrollment in there and then you put enrollment with student address and you put all your direct certs, and it'll tell you who's a household match. So you could actually use this spreadsheet like kind of as a manual process. Even if you're not applying for CEP, you could use the formulas that are baked into it to be able to see who's a household match if your POS doesn't do it, because yeah, it's like a lot being left on the table for matches that aren't being made unless you have a sophisticated system like you're talking about, Mike.
Yeah.
Jen, do you want to put that link in again?
Oh, I was like, here it is. Yeah, yeah, there we go. Thanks.
It's such a great tool. And Jackie, you raised a great point there around that consistency in the data entry being such a headache, right? And so that's where these advanced software systems that state's rolling out, at least for the matching piece, can take into account some of those typos and inconsistencies to still produce the matches.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
going
and
back
it's frustrating. Yeah. Mhm.
Go ahead, Jen. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, even my last name, McNeil, on my passport, it's MC space NEIL. But then on everything else, it's not having a space. But certain things get lost because they're like, I can't find you because I'm supposed to have the space sometimes, but not other times. I'm like, just get rid of the space. So.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, like, going back, you know, again, there's a lot of the free and reduced systems. Well, I'd say a lot of them, but at least I know a few of them. They already utilize that fuzzy match lookup, and what it's basically doing, to kind of explain it a little bit further, is it looks at the different fields and it scores each field. So if you have the birth date, that gives you some points. If you have the first name, that gives you some points. The last name, so on and so forth. And you can look at it based off of a point threshold, and some systems will allow you to actually set that point threshold to, let's say, if I get 1,000 points or higher, I want to automatically match that person, right? So it found enough of that information that it felt like it was a good match. But even in the cases where it doesn't, it'll allow you to look at those and say, well, maybe this is still a match. And if not, you can, some of them will even have a little button that says, you know, phone the parent, and it'll bring up the phone number, and then you can call the parent and ask them to make sure that information is correct. So a lot of the free and reduced systems already have that type of fuzzy match lookup built into them as well.
These are such great questions. I am so grateful you all are willing to enter into this highly technical, nerdy space with us to figure out how to maximize federal funding. I mean, the fact that you're feeding kids every day is incredible. And then to also like put your brains in this like highly technical space is just, yeah, I'm so in awe of all of you and these incredible questions. Mike, did we miss any of them?
I don't think so. It looks like we've gotten everybody.